What's the notification?
Yeah, does say you're.
Yeah, it says Youri is recording the call. Okay, yeah.
And you got that too, Margaret?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And on this special edition of 1+1, it's our Make Me Wanna Holler, all things Black civil rights struggle and the Black diaspora. It's our All Things Canada edition, and what makes this even more special is that it's our special Canada Day special and our truth-telling July 4th special. So who better to join us than my two heroines, my two sheroes, and two of the finest truth-telling and myth-busting women. We're joined by Margaret Kimberley. Margaret is the senior columnist and executive editor of Black Agenda Report, which is news, commentary, and analysis from a Black left perspective. And she's also a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, a superb Black American-led anti-imperialist organization, and a fine independent journalist, media and NGO critic, and racial social justice activist and anti-imperialist campaigner. And then also joining us is Elle Jones. And Miss Jones is an outstanding poet, racial and social justice activist, a campaigning abolitionist, co-host of the radio show Black Power Hour, a contributor to The Breach's YouTube show, and she is an educator, but I don't exactly know what she teaches. Miss Jones, what do you teach up in Nova Scotia?
I'm in the Department of Political and Canadian Studies at Mount Saint Vincent University.
Perfect. And yes, and they're both of our guests for the hour. And again, very excited because, oh my gosh, you have Elle Jones from Canada, Margaret Kimberley from the US, and we're going to be shitting on Canada Day and shitting on the 4th of July, so it's going to be fantastic.
Good.
So my first question I'd like to ask, and we'll start with Margaret, and then Ms. Jones, you can always, Ms. Jones, you can respond after I ask Margaret's questions, and so we'll rotate like that. Okay. So my first question I'd like to ask Margaret is your thoughts on the upcoming 4th of July celebrations and why Black, Latinx, Indigenous folk, and folks who live in the U.S. colonies like Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, why they should start, protesting against the 4th of July, just like in Canada. It now seems annual to be protesting Canada Day. In Australia, every January they always protest Australia Day, and they calling it a national day of mourning. So what's your response to that?
Well, thanks, Youri. It's great to be back with you. I'm going to read a sentence from the Declaration of Independence, which was signed July 4th, 1776, hence the July 4th holiday. And this is a quote. Quote, "He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions," unquote. Talk about projection. But I want to talk, when growing up in the U.S., what were we taught about the Declaration of Independence? Stories about the stamp tax and some kind of act and the tea tax and all, and these poor people, they couldn't live under the tyranny of the king. And so they decided to become independent. But no one tells you about, and there's a link between Canadian history and July 4th. We grew up being told about the French and Indian War, which was the 7 Years' War between England and France. But the name French and Indian War is accurate. It was fought on this continent as well, with the British fighting the French, who had allied themselves with indigenous people. So in 1763, the war ends. Britain gets this new territory. However, because of continued resistance from Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa Nation and others, they did not want settlers to move into these areas, to move west of the Appalachian Mountains, they wanted them to stay on the eastern seaboard. They, of course, wanted it all. People like George Washington, who made a living as a land surveyor. Some of them had already purchased lands in these, what they called the frontier. So for the British, and just to be clear, the British and the French, they're fighting over what territory that wasn't theirs. Let's just be clear about that.
Yeah.
But it complicated life for them if these settlements expanded. And in fact, what Americans call the Midwest was had been French territory until the British won this war. But to make a long story short, they did not want the settlers to complicate their lives with the French, with the indigenous resistance, and wanted to restrict them to the East Coast. And that is not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to expand as far across the continent as they could go. So that's the link between Canada and the US with July 4th. Basically, it's about conquest. The settlers, the American colonists, the settler, I'm going to say settler. We were told they were patriots, they were colonists, they were all kinds of things. They were afraid the British might end slavery, and they did not want to be restricted in their expansion. So that is why they struck out for independence. But the British knew that the enslaved population could be a resource for them, and they promised freedom to those who fought for them. So Americans are told about a Black man named Crispus Attucks, who was the first one to die in the American Revolution, and are never told that Black people fought with the British. And they ended up in Nova Scotia, which I'll let Elle talk about. So that's my answer to the problem with this holiday. And people celebrate, quote unquote, with cookouts, and they have a day off and they take a trip and whatever. But as far as actually celebrating the holiday, that's something that no conscious person should do.
Perfect answer. And Ms. Jones, it's Canada Day, and I actually had a Canada Day special with an Indigenous person from Canada, Damien from British Columbia. Your thoughts on Canada Day, and your thoughts on Canada Day? Why Black Canadians should be joining their Indigenous brothers and sisters and elders in protesting this day, and just your overall thoughts on it.
Well, obviously, first of all, the kind of narrative for Black people is sometimes complicated by these model minority newcomer narratives, right? So a significant portion, obviously I'm not there right now, but I live in historical African Nova Scotia, which has a population that's been there hundreds of years, but in many other parts of Canada it is relatively recent. People that are immigrants or refugees, and that is always accompanied by a kind of coercive gratefulness, right? Where people feel compelled to, sometimes like quite literally compelled to, perform forms of, we're grateful to be in Canada, it's peaceful here. So I think that's perhaps a little different than, say, not that like there aren't African Americans that are super patriotic in the military and stuff, but you have a population that's like in the US that's like, we built this with slavery, right? Whereas we have a bit of a fractured narrative, perhaps, that like there's no kind of one narrative in the Black community, unfortunately. We've been doing Cancel Canada Day events for a long time, like with the Indigenous, so I live with Mi'kmaq people, right? So we for a long time had Cancel Canada Day events, and this is intensified over the last couple of years because of the finding of all the bodies of children on the grounds of the residential schools. So last year Canada Day was somewhat supposedly canceled, it was really just COVID. But this year, this year, like where I am in Winnipeg right now, like everybody's losing their mind because the Forks is doing, instead of doing Canada Day, they called it New Day, and they have a lot of Indigenous stuff, and all the white people are just like losing their minds. Like, we can't even have Canada Day. This is divisive. We need unity. We also have the Freedom Convoy return to Ottawa.
Yes.
Yeah. So the thing about that too is, of course, they were there in February where they occupied the city for 3 weeks, terrorizing people, like quite literally. So, just leaning on their horns 24 hours a day so nobody could sleep, harassing.
Wait a minute. You mean the Freedom Convoys weren't this wonderful working class left-wing populist movement that some of our comrades on Twitter say that like we should get behind?
90% of truckers, of course, were vaccinated, and those who weren't were able to work within Canada. So it was obviously completely manufactured. But the reason why I'm talking, of course, they came back this time, and they were using Canada flags the first time too. So, somebody did a satiric tweet that's like, give us back, this idea that the liberal media is like, you can't have our beautiful symbol of Canada and make it violent, which is like what we're seeing from like the liberal media, like how dare they corrupt our symbol of Canada, like as if it's not, Indigenous genocide. Exactly. But I think that's also telling. So, if you watch the footage from January 6th, for example, they're waving American flags, right? And they're signaling that only we are the real citizens, us evangelical white conservative Trump voters are the real citizens of America. So we actually do think it's patriotic to, go to the Capitol because we are the real voters and everything else is illegitimate, right? So you have these particular expressions of white freedom, and we're seeing the same thing with the so-called convoy, right? I mean, we don't even have mandates anymore. Everything's lifted, but there's still like, freedom, like they're still going to go, because what it really is about is asserting white political ownership and power, right? This flag belongs to us. You are all latecomers, newcomers, illegitimate whiners, second-class citizens. I always say that they didn't do any freedom convoys when Dr. Ngola was being run out of New Brunswick, when he was forcibly named. So that's a Congolese doctor who was falsely named by the premier of the province as having been ground zero for COVID, and received a barrage of doxing, racist death threats, and was run out of the province. Like, they weren't like freedom men, right? They didn't care. We just had a report a week ago or two from the Toronto Police Service that, unshockingly revealed their use of more statistics and strip searches against Black and Indigenous people, which were, again, unshockingly, like, massively, like, high. The freedom convoy is not like, we need to stop this violent policing. So this is like, this is Canada. So our whole thing is always our relationship to the US, and Canada should just be renamed. It's not like that here, because that's really our entire thing. So, whenever you try to talk about racism or injustice or genocide in Canada, it's always like, well, it's not like the American South. We didn't have slavery, which we did. We don't have prisons, which we do. We don't have mass incarceration. Our former police chief, the one before the one we have now, used to talk about the Ferguson effect, which was his idea that we only talk about police brutality against Black people because we're contaminated by the United States. So like, we watch TV and then we believe. In other words,
it's all imaginary, the racism Black Canadians experience.
A hygiene argument, right? That we're being contaminated somehow. So, I'll say one more thing. So why should we not celebrate Canada? Obviously, we shouldn't celebrate Canada because, patriotism in itself is like, just by its nature, like displays of patriotism are always some kind of problem. In Nova Scotia, or in Halifax, we have the military tattoo over Canada Day weekend. So this is where they bring in military and police bands from around the world, and then they put on a show, which in recent years, of course, they've added gospel choirs too.
Jesus.
So it's like very diverse, right? Like, they'll have like Indigenous drummers, and then and of course it's multicultural, like bands. One year it was the Marine band from the US, and that was right when we were all protesting Trump's immigration, like putting kids in cages. And then they came down into the place, like they were just practicing in the square where people were. So people surrounded them, said, shame on you. And then everyone lost their minds. Like, how dare these lefties harass these innocent Marines? This is so violent. Like, the city needs to apologize to the Marines because people who actually live in the city and we're actually holding a protest, like, dared to just be like, your country's shameful. Like, this is, so this year they had an alliance with a group for veterans that uses the thin blue line patch as their logo. So then they're like, oh no, we're gonna remove the thin blue line patch. So this media person asked me about it, and I'm like, but isn't the whole thing a celebration of the military and violent policing? Like, isn't it actually just a 4-day thin blue line patch? Like, isn't that what the whole thing is? Like, so, this is just what we're dealing with. I live in one of the most militarized cities in Canada. And of course, because Canada doesn't have any reckoning with our own history, like, everyone's just freaking out about Indigenous people, and like, this isn't reconciliation, and white people are the real victims. And I told people that they should, if they really wanted to see fireworks, they could go buy their own. And I realized that probably a bunch of right wingers will be walking around with no fingers next week. So,
But with that would be all right, though. I mean, that would be kind of that. I mean, yeah, that would be all right. So, by the way, I do not wish. Well, no, I do wish injuries on far right wing douchebags. So, there you go.
Well, I'm not wishing it on them. I'm just saying afterwards I didn't give a safety warning, so I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, they might blow their own hands off, right? It's not safe to play with fire.
Well, Margaret, then I have to ask you, when do you think the U.S. Because this is what's kind of ironic about, this is what's kind of weird about the U.S. when I compare the U.S. to Canada, is so Canada has been reckoning with its settler colonial past and its present. Although when it comes to speaking out against like Canadian, Canadian imperialism and Canada being a partner in crime to the Anglo-American Empire, there still is a struggle to acknowledge that and to have a conversation that Canada's never been a force for good. But in the U.S., like I find in the U.S., and I do find that Americans are sometimes way too critical about themselves. I do find like in the U.S. there's a very strong Black power movement, a very strong anti-NATO, anti-imperialist movement, Palestine justice movement, queer liberation, Latinx pride, and so forth. So this two-part question is, when do you think the U.S. is going to start protesting the 4th of July, Thanksgiving Day, or Thanksgiving Day, as people prefer to call Columbus Day? And then also, when do you think the American left and their media and their organizations are going to focus more on the plight of Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Alaskans, like the way the Canadian left is doing in their consciousness and showing solidarity to Indigenous people?
Well, I think some of that exists already, but you're going up against what Elle just described, a lot of complaining and whining that people can't, we can't enjoy Thanksgiving anymore. And some of it comes from Black people who say, well, we're not the ones who killed the Indians, it's the day for us to be with our families, and so we should be able to have it. But I think on the left there is a general understanding of how these celebrations are problematic, and I think among most Black people there is, but it's very deeply ingrained. It's generations of tradition. It's family history. A friend of mine, posted on Facebook, we had a great 4th of July. We weren't thinking about Thomas Jefferson or the Declaration of Independence. And yeah, I'm sure that's true. She said it was just a wonderful day for us. Mm-hmm. And my sisters invited me over on July 4th, and I'm going to go. We're going to eat and, watch movies or something. But
they also take pot shots at the founding fathers, right?
Sure. Anybody who calls these horrible people, these people practice genocide. There's no other way to describe them. They were, most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were slaveholders. They were all complicit in their drive to expand, as I said, across the continent. And there was, in addition to in 1763, in the 1770s, just a couple years before the Declaration of Independence was signed, the British were trying to make nice with the people of Quebec and gave them lands in the Midwest, which people like George Washington already had their eye on. So it's important for people to know this, but even though people have this general idea that it's kind of messed up to celebrate this, they do not have the history. It's hidden from us. This is not some secret history locked away in a vault. Anybody who wants to know what I just said can find out. But we're lied to. And I think we have to talk about that, the level of indoctrination that we face in school, from elementary school through university. I don't know how many people have actually read the Declaration of Independence. It's not very long. And to know that I don't know how, I was an adulthood before I knew that it referred to the Native people as savages. And that's all they did was talk about they're savages, they're taking our stuff, and they're going to be a slave revolt, and it's constant. So people have these kind of vague ideas, but the specifics are things most people don't know about. And that's why I reprinted in Black Agenda Report this week what I wrote last year, The Terrible Origins of the 4th of July. And it's something that has to be talked about even more. We still don't talk about it enough. And now there's this reaction against truth telling. So the word woke is used all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything to me. It never did. It's all wokeism. So if you question any official narrative, it's wokeism. There are people in Texas who want to start an anti-woke charter school. I kid you not. This is absolutely true. So if you're not waving the flag, if you're not saying God bless America and America's the greatest country in the world, and then you are woke and you're doing things that are terrible. This fraud about critical race theory, which is a legal theory taught in law schools. They have whipped people up into a frenzy who are convinced that their, 6 or 7-year-olds are being taught critical race theory. I wish. But now it's an attack. It's an attack on education itself. And they've actually passed laws in a variety of states. You can't teach anything that might make somebody feel guilty. Well, then you can't teach anything. But I guess that's their goal, right? I suppose they're being honest. They don't want people to be informed. So yes, there's a sizable number of people who have some awareness, some discomfort, but overall, it's not there.
And actually, Ms. Jones, I definitely want your your responses. But before I get your response to what Margaret was saying, do you both think that the reason why even amongst the best of the left in the United States, the reason why they don't focus on the plight of Native Americans, Indigenous Hawaiians, and Alaskans is because, Margaret, you mentioned how people don't like to, how even Black people, how some just say, oh, enough of the politics. Can I just enjoy my hot dogs and my burgers on the 4th of July? Do you think the reason why there's that, and by the way, there are even, I know even Marxists who lionize the founding fathers and stuff, and stuff like that, and get very offended if you talk bad about honest Abraham Lincoln. So do you think the reason why there isn't this much focus on the plight of Native Americans compared to Canada is because when you really, really, really look at what those, Glenn Ford said, the founding fathers, those miserable sons of a bitches, is because when you really look into their history and what they did to Native Americans, what still is happening to Native Americans, the very extreme apartheid that they experienced, is because you basically have to stop being a patriot. You have to stop being a patriot, and you would have to. I don't know if you would have to cancel the 4th of July, but you would definitely have to celebrate the real Americans, which are Indigenous Americans and those who fought to actually try to resist manifest destiny and child slavery.
Well, I think there's another problem in the United States. The Indigenous population is very small. And so there's an inclination to want to ignore them. That's first of all. And I think that unfortunately makes it easier. But still there's racism. Obviously that's how both these nations started, right? With white supremacy. And white supremacy, as the late Glenn Ford said, that's America's true religion. And acknowledging past wrongs, acknowledging current wrongs, acknowledging that racism is very real and present is something that is often scorned. However, I think Black people have a different, I think when people want to ignore things, it just makes you uncomfortable. I think most people try to live as best they can. Everybody knows they are discriminated against. They know they make less than their white coworkers. They know they're more likely to get killed by the police. They know all these things. And but nobody gives anybody, there aren't enough people who give a blueprint, a path to overcome these things. And I think that leads to an inclination to be in denial. Because it is difficult to acknowledge wrongs and nobody tells you, okay, this is what we need to do. And so I think that's a cause of this denial among Black people, in addition to the other things that I mentioned.
Ms. Jones, I'm curious your response. What do you think it's going to take for the American left to get to the level the Canadian left and folks like you are when it comes to showing solidarity to Indigenous people? I mean, you don't have to do land acknowledgements, but it's baked in like the consciousness, it seems, of the Canadian left to always acknowledge that whatever injustice is going on, it starts first with our Indigenous people. When do you think the U.S. will get to the level Canada is in that respect?
But you're giving us a little bit too much credit, I think. Part of the reconciliation thing in Canada is a very neoliberal project, right? Glenn Coulthard writes about this in Red Faces, White Mass. I don't know. It's an adaptation of Francois's title. I can't remember. Sorry, I'm just blanking on how he exactly frames it. But he talks about the politics of recognition, right? Like, and the mistake of demanding to be recognized by the state. And he's like, Indigenous people don't need or want to be recognized. And he talks about, how liberal governments in particular perform like the politics of recognition, like going to TP or land acknowledgements and all of this. So that's very much where a lot of stuff in Canada is located, right? So yeah, we do land acknowledgements, but yeah, it's now, you go, you're in university and you go to people say it. My sister said they have to say it in court now. Like, so you're in like the white supremacist court, like convicting Indigenous people. You're like, I acknowledge that I stand on Treaty 1 territory.
Oh, like, wow.
So like, and I mean, many Indigenous people have talked about this, like just reading the land acknowledgement doesn't mean anything. Like, just you thinking about like why you're on this land and whose territory is it, and moving towards sovereignty, and not just as like, it's like, there's all these jokes about like, cops giving land acknowledgements before they go out to like gas and like, murder Indigenous people, like, before I take an axe and chop down your ancestral lodge on Wet'suwet'en territory, I just want to acknowledge that I'm here on ancestral unceded territories, whack, 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 so,
wow.
Like, just, but it's a very kind of liberal project in Canada, and there's obviously the Indigenous resurgence, so people like Coulthard, Liam, Betta, Sambasaki Simpson, there's a very political wing, obviously a lot of the Idle No More stuff that is very, and the land back movement, so, like, yes, people on the left are part of that, but yeah, I mean, I just wouldn't like give us that much credit, like, people are actually walking around centering Indigenous people, because nobody is, because like obviously the central thing is land sovereignty, and nobody's like even beginning to suggest that they might, move their house or like deed their land back or anything like that, which would be the actual gestures, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is another example of Canada's PR, I think.
Yeah, it's we do the same thing. It's a lot of performance, I think, and people think every meeting starts out with land acknowledgement and a pronoun, and I don't know what it means. What does it mean to people? How many people are going through the motions? How many people really think it's important? And at the end of the day, is it just performative? Okay, so you say you're on the land of X people, then what? What happens then? So there's this, this inclination to say, well, I've done my job. I can pat myself on the back. I, gave a land acknowledgement, when that by itself doesn't amount to anything.
Yeah, it's funny. In Australia, they do land acknowledgements. And when I used to follow Australian politics, particularly the plight of Aboriginal people, I noticed when I would when I would watch, left things on the YouTube, they would do the land acknowledgements, but of course, basically the Aboriginal people, just like Native Americans, face one of the most brutal, white supremacist regimes on the planet. In the U.S., there's some acknowledgement. There's not the genocide denialism that there is in Australia, where they still, I still believe it's ongoing. They have this thing called the history wars, where these white supremacist academics and commentators say that there was no, like, we didn't steal the land, like, there was no genocide. And hey, even if, and hey, when we did come here, like, the culture was already starting to die out. So they should be grateful for us because we gave them capitalism and stuff like that.
Well, we have that here. There's a lot of denial. I mean, it's said out loud, just as you described. We don't have anything to feel guilty about. Indian tribes fought each other. We didn't do anything they didn't do, or an acknowledgement, and well, it was a long time ago, has nothing to do with me, or well, my family came from fill in the blank country, and I'm descended from people from Italy. They didn't have anything to do with. I mean, there's all kinds of. There's outright denial. There's so what, F you. There's why should I feel guilty. There's the upfront supremacy, the Europeans are superior. It comes in a variety of forms.
And then there's the, I had one Indigenous ancestor in the 17th century, so now I'm Indigenous.
Yeah, I effing hate that completely. That makes me sick to my stomach when people do that. Just like unbelievable. But then that's a perfect segue then to, yeah, that's a perfect then, segue to this question, which is, I mean, what do you think it's going to take then for all of the, just remember what my question was. Yeah, Miss Jones, what do you think then it's going to take in Canada for the left and the society at large to, I mean, because in Canada, there is a lot of acknowledgement now for its colonial past and its present. But what do you think it's going to take for the Black Lives Matter movement in Canada and all of the different people power movements to speak out more on what Canada does overseas? Because I remember Eve Engler once, said that we can now say that this country was founded on genocide and so forth, but we can never say that Canadian foreign policy is for the behest of corporations and partner in crime to the American empire. So when do you think, Canada's going to get to a level like it is in the U.S. where there's lots of outspoken people who speak out about America's real role in the world?
I mean, I don't know. Like, we have the National War Forum in my city, which, Margaret, you actually spoke at our protest of. And you'd think there'd be thousands of people protesting this, and it's very small, right? Like, one year when they would, the Israel foreign minister or somebody was here, and they were bombing Palestine at the same time the Palestinians came out, and that was a huge year. But most years it's literally like 10 anti-war leftists like huddled in, outside. So they hold it at this hotel, the Westin, and it's literally like, I mean, McCain came through, John McCain, Condoleezza Rice came when she was Secretary of State. All the G20 generals. I had a media pass this year, and they were talking, like, it was generals that were literally bragging about being around the table when they decided to invade Afghanistan after 9/11, and how good that was because we got consensus really quickly. Like, this is who's in the city, the head of the think tank, the editors of like The Economist or whatever, all the G20 generals, the economy ministers, and they literally sit around and plot war. I think they took it offline, but used to be able to see the previous agendas. And it was literally like, Syria, is it the path to China? They would just be like, literally, if you could go back, when you could go back, you could see, 5 years later, suddenly the whole news is like, China's evil. This year, the theme was China is evil. And they actually had these statements of principles against China, and you're supposed to stand at a video booth and be like, I want internet freedom, hashtag hate China. I'm like, this is deranged. But that's, and nobody knows it's going on, is my point. That happens in my city, and very few people come out. The same people that have every conspiracy theory about whatever, because everyone loves conspiracy theory. So people have their elaborate conspiracy theory about this, that, I can't even think, how George Soros is doing whatever. And then I'm like, no, the actual elites that plot actual world destruction are down the road, right now, you could go protest them, and no one wants to go. So again, because we don't have the extent of patriotism of the US, where, and the military is more people are in the military in the US, obviously, a lot of people have military members in their family. I guess it's not, our patriotism is faux, this is just classic Canada, right? Faux humble patriotism or something, right? We don't have the same kind of just on steroids patriotism. So
it's not as obnoxious as in the U.S.
But it's in its own way, right? That's the problem. That's the problem in Canada. Is our whole thing is that we always hang our hat on, well, the U.S., well, the U.S., well, the U.S., and our thing may look different, but it's ultimately as destructive, right? So part of the problem in Canada is I don't think a lot of Canadians believe that we believe we're peacekeepers, right? That's a whole Canadian thing. Peacekeepers were raping boys in Somalia, right? Like when we were in Somalia, we, raped and tortured like little Somali boys, which nobody talks about. They like a whole unit got disbanded because of the behavior in Somalia, but like people don't know about it. Of course, we were instrumental in the coup in Haiti, like we're instrumental in the Lima group. Like, these are all things that we do, but Canadians literally do not know this. So the same Canadians will often be like, the US is a colonizer, like they invaded Iraq, have no idea, where Canadian operations are, right? And so again, we sort of conveniently hide behind this figure of the US military in the US, which is a global imperial power. And I think Canadians really believe that we're not, like we're, but like then we were trying to get on the US Security Council, right? Like that's been our thing, like we can't get on it, and like they just really want to get on it and like can't, so I think it's just Canadians have a very like the average American would probably be more conversant in American foreign policy than the average Canadian would be in Canadian foreign policy. So I think it's just, we just do not have a big anti-war movement. It doesn't come up. And we're building one, like World Beyond War, Bianca and Eves, they've been like building this up, and those have been quite successful. Like, I think it was left wing everywhere. Like there was a big anti-war left through the 60s, and they just, it got, that hasn't been a priority of a lot of people. So connecting it to police is important. Like if you care about policing, like policing and military obviously go hand in hand. Like they quite literally share surplus weapons. They train each other. It's the same ideologies. One's just, inside and one's directed outside. Like, you have to start connecting things. The environmental movement, like, if you care about the environment, you should care about militarism. If you care about immigrants and borders and refugee rights, like you understand that the refugees are coming from the places that we're destabilizing, right? So it's like bringing that back, but yeah, it's not being the sort of strongest, sexiest, trendiest movement. So when you go to things, it tends to be like a bunch of like old Marxist leftists that are like 90 years old, because that's and I'm not like downcrying that, I love them, but I'm just saying that you're not going to see a lot of 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 14-year-olds at an anti-war protest in the way you would an environmental protest or an Indigenous rights protest or Black Lives Matter, right? So and
even the Black Power struggle movements and the Indigenous Lives Matter movement, are they also quite silent on Canada's imperialism overseas?
I mean, I can't speak for every Indigenous person. Obviously, Indigenous people, the main commitment is land back, like quite correctly, right? Like to your own territory, to nationhood, to reclaiming and relearning language, to relearning and going out on the land. Like, like obviously that's a priority. I wouldn't say there's like no Indigenous people. I'm sure there are Indigenous people that make those connections, right? But obviously, Indigenous people actually, are grounded in place. Like it's about rebuilding your nations that have been, deliberately destroyed. And I think, yeah, obviously Indigenous people connected to Indigenous people around the world, for example. So definitely through that, like recognizing the struggle in Bolivia or Colombia, or, there's a lot of movements like Indigenous fisheries collectives where they, talk about fish. So yes, they do. But yeah, and then again, like with Black people, you have that combination, like I think you may think there's a bigger Black left in Canada than there is the other thing. Canada, I think, is very vulnerable to that, perhaps more explicitly said in the state, but implicitly lived out in Canada, that, leftism is whiteness, right? So like Marxism, this is a Marxist white European project, and it's not really Black. So I think there's a sort of deliberate narrative, Adolf Fried would say that, created by our gatekeeping elites on purpose, that our focuses should be EDI and, more settlement money to like get more wealthy, like upper class, like African or Caribbean immigrants, slight justice reform, slight police reform, those are kind of the things. And not, this sort of more radical idea. So yeah, we don't really have a radical Black left. I'm frequently like the only Black person at sort of classic leftist events, right? Like stuff about housing or poverty or war. So part of that is just, we don't have a very unified left in Canada, I don't think at all. But Black Alliance for Peace is trying to remedy the same thing, right? Like it's just, for whatever reason, like real neoliberal political reasons, reasons, the deliberate co-opting, shifting, and elite-driven priorities of the Black community that are created by the white classes and colluded to by the gatekeeping Black classes, all of these, like, anti-war isn't a priority, because it's much easier to get people to think the priority is natural hair at work or Black businesses, which is the thing we're obsessed with in Canada. It's all capitalism and like entrepreneurship. That's all we got out of George Floyd, is like grants for Black businesses, loans for Black businesses, our 50th Black business organization. Like that's literally all we have, and that's what we've been told are our priorities. So yeah, you look like a weirdo if you're like, oh, and also we should be talking about Canada's activities in Haiti, like, outside of Haitians, obviously, and, other communities. Like, you're not going to hear about that in a lot of places. So, in other words, we just have to build it up. Like, you need, strong organizing, you need to connect it to other movements. People need to understand why it's important, why it connects to our other struggles, what our actual history and role is. And those things aren't necessarily happening on a large scale, but they are happening, but not like throughout the whole land.
Before I talk about the police, abolitionism, or community control over the police, I wanted both of your responses to this. I had back on the program a while ago, Elena Porter of the Pendo Center for Self-Determination and Human Rights, I believe, which is very much like a radical Black I would say it's a Black nationalist movement in the tradition of the We Charge Genocide that Paul Robeson was doing and what Malcolm X is trying to do at the United Nations. But she was once, she once said to me, twice on the air that apparently, some Native American tribes engaged in slavery and stuff like that. And I don't know if she wants like I don't remember if she wants like reparations from those like descendants of Native Americans, but I wanted your reaction on that, because I remember having a discussion with an Afro-Indigenous person to sort of clarify that part of history. But for me, I just feel that like Black people in America and Black people in America, we got 99 problems, but Native Americans definitely aren't top of the list of our problems, even if some may have engaged in slavery.
Yeah, that is true. The southern tribes, they were called the civilized tribes. The Cherokee was a very large slaveholding tribe. Cherokees, Seminoles, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek. I can't believe I remembered all that. And they were in the southern states, in places like North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama. Anyway, the Southeast. And President Andrew Jackson, before he was president, as a general, he's the one who drove them out of their ancestral lands. They were all pushed to what is now Oklahoma. It was called Indian Territory at the time.
That was the Trail of Tears, right?
I'm sorry?
That was the Trail of Tears, I believe?
The Trail of Tears, yes, it was. So yes, there were slave-holding Indian tribes. The Cherokee are also known for denying rights to the people and they have Cherokee ancestry, the descendants of enslaved people, denying them tribal benefits, which now amount to, casinos and things like that. So yes, that's true, that exists, but that's not a reason to ignore genocide, which took place in order to grow what was called the slaveocracy. So why were those people pushed off their lands? It's simple. They wanted that land to cultivate cotton, especially, which impacted us directly. So even if you're looking at it in an enlightened, selfish way, you should still see the connection. So I'm not one who is a narrow nationalist and can't talk about that. So yes, it is true. There were slaveholding tribes. Is that your mom? Hi, Mom. Anyway,
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Anyway, I don't know where I was, but I wanted to say one other thing, though. Americans have this ideal about Canada that that it's a nicer, someone told a joke, a comedian told a joke that Canada was like having a nice apartment above a meth lab, you know, and US being a meth lab, which the US is akin to a meth lab. But there's this idea that Canada's nicer. And in some ways, I mean, how hard is it, right, though, to be better than the US? It's like, well, they've got national health insurance and they have gun control and, you know, you don't go you're not in debt your whole life to go to college, and those things are true. But you know, Canada is also, it's a settler colonial state. It's the U.S. partner in crime. Everything the U.S. does, you know, the U.S. declares Juan Guaido is the president of Venezuela, so does Canada, and they're part of this Lima group, which is dedicated to overthrowing the Venezuelan government. And Elle made mention of the Canadian troops wherever the U.S. goes. So the U.S. is in Somalia, Canadians are in Somalia and committing atrocities too. So and it's a, you know, member of NATO and the G7, which is, you know, like one and the same. A bunch of thieving nations, you know, white supremacist, nations. So that's another issue, and I'm sure Canadians know this and think, see, there are Americans who say we have such a nice country. So that I wanted to bring that up too. And listen, if somebody goes to live in Toronto so they can get health insurance, then Godspeed. I'm not going to hold it against them, but it shouldn't be with illusions that Canada is something other than it is. It's a capitalist nation. It's part of the EU, NATO axis of imperialism. And, you know, this, you know, we hate China. China's evil. The U.S. is going through that. They're trying to do to Taiwan what they did to Ukraine. It's like you didn't have one thing blew up in your face and you're going to go and have something else blow up in your face. But that's a bigger discussion of the desperation of U.S. hegemony. But I wanted to add that.
And Ms. Jones, what do you think about, you know, about some of the stuff that happened in the past with some Indigenous leadership of certain tribes that had slaves? Was that the same in Canada? And do you think that, like, if there ever was like a reparations, that like Indigenous people should be included in that, or no, because Black people in Canada and the U.S., y'all got 99 problems, but the Indigenous people definitely aren't one of them?
I think that kind of rhetoric is really a fundamental misunderstanding of colonialism. This is the entire point of colonialism. Like, William Hall, who's, you know, great Nova Scotian hero who won the Victoria Cross or whatever, I don't know, these military medals. And, you know, he was active in the, you know, so-called Indian Mutiny, right? That's where he's getting his medal from, a Black man. So, you know, he's celebrating the Black community because, like, this is, you know, the 1800s and this Black man is a military hero, but where is he? India. He's like in the British Army. You know, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, which we're getting an apology from the government for, that's Black people serving in a colonial military, right? Like, you know, so Black people, Buffalo Soldiers, what are Buffalo Soldiers? But, you know, Black people being used to colonize and settle the West, right? And like clear Indigenous people, and vice versa.
Bob Marley got it wrong then.
Yeah, you know, and vice versa. So, you know, there's histories of Black people that, you know, in order for survival and citizenship and, you know, all the things that we're trying to win, participate in Indigenous genocide, like as junior part, you know, like in not like because we have this free choice to do it, because it's the way to gain some kind of survival or citizenship. And Indigenous people have enslaved Black people or have, you know, so this is just part of colonialism. You could go through any group and talk about, you know, at this point, you know, it's not like Gandhi, like pro-Black, you know what I mean? Like Gandhi had terrible things to say about the Black South African population. So this is all part of how colonialism categorizes people, hierarchizes people, sets people against each other. So I don't know that it's the most productive for us to be like, oh, well, I'm not going to support Indigenous people because Indigenous people over here enslave Black people. Or for Indigenous people to be like, oh, I don't care about Black people because Black people, you know,
get
part
too
of
much
this
attention compared to our plights, or
yeah, like this is classic divide and rule. So I'm not saying we can't recognize. In fact, we need to understand these histories because we need to understand the complex and full histories of how colonialism and white supremacy work. Like how is whiteness constructed, right? Like how is all this working? Like where does racial categorization come from? What's its purpose? Like that's all really important. But I don't think the productive narrative would be to then be like, oh, well, you know, like, you did this to us then under the behest of white supremacy, so therefore, right? Like, yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I just, you know, I mean, when I was talking about Somalia, it was also that some of the people that were involved in that were actually Indigenous soldiers. So the question is, like, you know, what were they experiencing in these like racist white supremacist Canadian units that, you know, so they were actually some of the bigger perpetrators, but two of them were Indigenous. One was like made half Cree and one was, right? So like, this is complex. We're not children. We don't need childish narratives that, you know, fit into hashtags. We need to understand the complexity of history. We need to understand the kind of positions particularly people will put in, like face white supremacist violence or go to war for us, right? Like, you know, these kind of choices that aren't choices are what all of people living under colonialism are forced to make. And yes, often we betray each other. Often we betray ourselves. You've talked to, like, a lot about the class politics of the Black community. Like, you know, a lot, like, this is true of Black elites. You know, like, all of these different divisions are part of this project. So I think we all collectively, those of us who live under white supremacy, collectively need to understand those histories, to understand its current impacts on us, its role in much current conflict, and, you know, work against that, not kind of, you know, sort of just go, oh, well, you know, yeah, like, I'm condemning you for this.
Yeah, and also, you know, when it comes to the African Holocaust, and the African slave trade, you know, there were warring tribes in Africa in which some, literally sold out their rival tribes in order for, and those were the ones that got shipped off to the United States and were racked and stacked and so forth. And that's just a classic case of, you know, divide and conquer.
Right.
I was very surprised when I read Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. I always thought that all of the Native Americans were actually quite united in resisting white supremacy and white colonialism. But I was actually quite shocked when reading the book how much there was a lot of divide and conquering going on there. So some Indigenous people were on the side of, you know, of North during the American Civil War, and others knew the writing on the wall, knew that Abraham Lincoln was going to free maybe Black slaves, but was definitely going to continue manifest destiny on them. So some of them sided with the, you know, Confederacy, but that's just classic.
It is, but I don't think those examples let anybody off the hook. People usually talk about these things to let white people off the hook. So if there was, you know, Europeans fought each other, so of course Africans fought each other, or Indigenous people here fought each other, but they took advantage of that to commit a greater wrong. And you know, when white people are trying to excuse themselves, they always find something. Well, I know some, you know, Black people sold slaves. It's like, yeah, but it's because of the demand here. But they always leave out the tribes that resisted, that fought against enslavement and against the enslavers. Or they'll say that, you know, X number of Black people in the United States owned slaves. It's always some tiny numbers, like 4 million enslaved people. And they'll say, well, there were 5,000 Black people who owned slaves, who were almost all mulattoes, almost all the children of slaveholders, and mostly in Louisiana and South Carolina. So it's a very particular group, but that's supposed to be an out for them when they bring up these things. So I think it's important to know the facts and to call them out. It's like, no, you don't get a pass because, you know, Joe Blow was a Black person who owned slaves. These are white supremacist projects. I still say all Native Americans, all Native Americans and all Black Americans unite and give white supremacy a bloody nose. You know, but white supremacy, it's difficult. It's so tied to the country. I mean, I think we would have to have a completely different society. I think it has to be a post-capitalist society. I think that would go a long way. You can't have this dog-eat-dog system that we have and have some justice. So, okay, suppose there is it's the same thing here. Black businesses, that's, you know, everybody's out to say so-and-so has a, you know, whatever kind of business. Well, that's nice. I'm certainly in favor of people being able to get these things if that's what they want. But it doesn't really mean any. First of all, capitalism is a sinking ship. Many of the crises we have been discussing are all because capitalism is in crisis. So who wants to jump on the sinking ship? I mean, to talk about Black capitalism is just absurd to me for that reason.
Perfect segue to the police. And I think, Elle, we've talked about this before, and I love it when you mention this when you're on The Breach and other programs, that, look, I'm all for, investments in our impoverished Black communities, whether they're in Belgium, Canada, the US, and so forth. But when there was protests going on in response to the murder of George Floyd nationwide in the United States, and then solidarity protests across Europe, where all sorts of people from the Black community and immigrant groups and other marginalized groups were talking about police brutality and the institutional racism they feel. From Australia to New Zealand to Canada, everybody was protesting about the murder of George Floyd and institutional racism. But something which really got under my skin was the pivoting of the subject from brutal racist state terrorism to, oh, we just need more investments in the Black communities. And once Black people are not working class and they're comfortable middle class or upper class, the police will not murder them anymore. And so can you talk about that before we talk about the different kinds of ways we can, yeah.
And I'm going to crib Adolph Reed here because he has a lot of clarity on this, right? Where he talks about the Black community itself as an invention of white elites. So he talks about how, Black leadership is designated and created by white elites in order to shepherd the Black community into their projects. So, he says like Booker T. Washington was appointed a Black leader by white people, right? Like, so the very notion of the Black community is a construct that serves Black elites who then position themselves as being the voice of the Black community. I need to be at the table. I made this report. My group needs this funding, this organization, whatever. And none of that is intended to, nor does it actually trickle down to the actual working class people who are the primary victims of police violence, lack of housing, violence, whatever case we're talking about. So it benefits Black elites, and I'm a university professor, so obviously I'm one of them. It benefits Black elites to use those statistics, right? So you go, and it's somehow supposed to be a continuum. So you go, Black people in Canada 10 times over incarcerated relative to our population, so I should be on the board of governors for the university. It's like, no, actually we should decarcerate Black people,
And the drug war and
yes, George Floyd was also, it was about he was literally accused of passing a bad 20. This is about, banking and capitalism and property. It's about the drug war, right? Like, this is the defense in court by Chauvin is he was high, he was on fentanyl, whatever. And those narratives are also class narratives. So what happened, immediately, not even post George Floyd, in the moment, we had the spectacle of a Bay Street banker, wearing, I am George Floyd shirts. And I'm like, dude, you're the guy that crushes people's mortgages and arrests people for the bad 20s. So there was absolutely no analysis of that. So very quickly, and I would say this, I'm not shocked by this, I know how, but to say it rhetorically, how do we switch from a movement that was supposed to be about state violence, brutal terror of the police, the working class masses hitting the streets, and turn it into, we just need some loans to Black businesses, right? That won't even get in the hands of Black women doing hair in their kitchen or, your grandmother's daycare, because it's not designed for that. So, and the project is obvious because one suits the neoliberal diversity project that has always been willing, during slavery as well, has always been willing to, appoint some small percentages of Black people that are allowed to be president of the United States or minister of immigration in Canada or, university president or owner of the football team or whatever it is, that then we, are supposed to celebrate and believe that is some kind of success. Now a Black person's bombing an African country. Yay! So it's inevitable. There's such a historical, Chris Hani was talking about this with the ANC in the 60s, right? They tried to execute him for talking about it. How all the ANC exiles were living high on the hog in London, raking in the money from guilty whites, and he's out, running a guerrilla war in South Africa, right? So This
so
is very
so I actually don't know about this person. So he was worrying about the ANC way before people like John Pilger did that documentary about how the ANC literally became the black leadership class and threw the people under the bus, not nationalizing, not going after the white supremacists, and all that stuff.
Dennis Brutus called this out right at the time too. He said that, we settle for bread and circuses, except we don't have bread and the circuses are lousy, like something like that. And Hani, who was the commander of the MK, right? Like, so very early on, he's recognizing that there's two things happening here. You have one class of people that, and Nelson Mandela like deals with the white government and agrees not to. They agree, obviously, not to, nationalize the mines, not to do anything really that was in the Freedom Charter, which we can also, understand, because white people weren't going to let South Africa liberate if it wasn't going to be under those terms, right? They were never going to, when in history have white people ever been expected to experience actual consequences? That's how we get Truth and Reconciliation, then gets transported everywhere. So we now have it in Canada for Indigenous people, and it's, the myth that it worked in South Africa, it didn't, nothing happened. People went to court and cried about all the torture they experienced. The white people didn't even show up. And then they went, also Winnie Mandela did bad things. So it's equal, both sides. And that's Truth and Reconciliation, right? And then they're like, oh, now let's do that with Indigenous people. So we're never intended to have justice. But the people that will always benefit are, the elite classes who then, and then we get these small little EDI gestures or more people on corporate boards or, whatever nonsense. So the responsibility, particularly of those of us who are in the elite black classes, is to recognize that, to really think about what our solidarity means, like what it means to, be in that relationship. And you have to do some also work with yourself on what actual principled activist sacrifice looks like, you can't be an activist and be living in a bunch of mansions. That doesn't work. It's the same thing as a preacher, right? If you're a black preacher and you're driving, 9 million,
Bentley.
Right? You can't, it doesn't work. And I would say it's the same thing. If you're supposedly a black activist, it's not that you have to, live in squalor. It's not that you can't have all black people deserve a safe place to live and deserve to support ourselves. But there's a difference between that and get the bag, baby. And there's too much, that becomes this political idea that people are this, I just need to get the bag. And you're have we thought about capitalism? Have we thought about what getting the bag means? So I'm rambling now, but that's post-2020 kind of very quickly. And we had actual black elites openly say things like, we can't have all these people out in the streets. They need a leader.
Unbelievable.
With a leader imagined as a straight, patriarchal, titled, respectable male, never a woman, who's then going to be our voice to government and get us things, which is actually what the government was willing to give us anyway, and not actual things that we want, defunding the police.
Yeah. And in the U.S., we've gone backwards. Nothing was defunded. There was no defunding of any police department anywhere in the United States, although that's claimed all the time. Well, crime is up because they defunded the police. Nobody defunded the police. And Joe Biden says he's going to give the police $30 billion more dollars. They have plenty of money. They don't need any money. So we've actually gone backwards in many ways, aside from these symbolic gestures of this or that person getting a big job or getting a grant or, foundation grants to all kinds of nonsense, people owning businesses, everything that Elle mentioned. I think here it happened because it was an election year and the presidential election takes all the air out of the room, and Americans are taught the extent of being politicized is about electoral politics.
And voting for the Democrats, no matter how atrocious the Democrat is.
Yeah. And ineffectual, as it turned out, but anyhow.
Perfect segue then to this question. Margaret, can you explain to an audience again what community control over the police is? This was something that's your friend and colleague, the late Glenn Ford, was a strong advocate of. And why do you... You have questions?
No, I'm hot.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to sit perfectly still. Also, this is true. But I don't know.
All right, no problem. All right, don't worry. I got 2 questions left, and then you can get out of that boiling hot room. so Margaret, can you talk about what that was that Glenn Ford was a strong advocate of, the community control over the police, and why you think social racial justice movement should be advocating for community control over the police rather than defund the police? And then Al, you can definitely respond to that.
Well, the idea of community control is that there should be some kind of mechanism where the police have to answer to people in the community, and the community decides who to hire, who to fire, what can this person do or not do. This person we don't want in our neighborhood anymore. How do the police respond to certain situations? No, you can't arrest people because they have a broken taillight. All kinds of things like that. But Glenn also concluded that you couldn't have community control of the police if you didn't have community control over the levers of government at all. So the idea that they would, allow community control of policing, which is such a central function of the maintenance of white supremacy, and when they didn't allow community control of anything else, is just absurd. So we're talking about a bigger picture of our ability to participate in the functions of government, real democracy, which is another story, but that's not something that Americans go on and on and on about democracy when there is absolutely nothing democratic about the United States. So that's community control. People argued about defunding versus control, but there hasn't been any defunding. I don't think there is going to be any defunding here in New York City.
And what was the warning? And what was the warning about defunding the police that you were explaining? Both to myself, but also when you were on Mint Press News, you were explaining why people should be very cautious when they say defund the police.
Yeah, the other thing, if you make it a matter of money, I'll tell you what they did here in New York City. So that year of the George Floyd protests, they just did a budgetary change. So people who worked in school security were under the NYPD budget, the police budget, and they just switched them out to the education budget. And they said, see, we've cut the police budget, when they hadn't at all. The police didn't have less money with this, budgetary trick, or they can hire private police. There's all kinds of things they can do. The issue is policing itself. That's the request, to change the nature of policing. And the tie to mass incarceration, very direct tie to mass incarceration, that is where the focus needs to be.
And Ms. Jones, what's your response to community control over the police? Because watching a lot, you and your colleague at The Breach, the brilliant Pamela Pomader, and different online events where the two of you have talked about abolitionism and abolishing the police. Do you think community control over the police would be a great way to get to a place where we can have no policing? Or
yeah, I mean, that's part of defunding as the broader project, right? Because I mean, when we wrote our report, we start with police governance and we end with democratic control of budgets, right? Like participatory budgeting. So the point is that you have to address all of those things. As Margaret said, like there's a way in which a neoliberal can come at defunding the police because it's budgetary, right? And it still fits into a capitalist frame. People are sort of saying defunding because they don't quite want to say abolish, right? Because abolish is sort of too inflammatory to really say on CBC or something. So you say defunding, and then that can mean a range of things. So some people, it just means, yeah, exactly. Like we have police foundations and now corporations pay for the SWAT team instead, But the broader idea is around shifting the entire edifice of punishment, property policing, all those things. So community control policing would be a principle of defunding, right? Like changing democratic governments of police. Like police boards are useless. They're supposed to be civilian oversight. They're stacked with cop lovers. They actually remove people anytime they challenge the police. You wouldn't believe what I've had to go through. And I did a whole report for them, and I still can't get in to do a public presentation when I'm trying to get to meetings. They make so many hurdles to prevent us from coming in and presenting. like we tend to defer to the courts to make decisions about policing, to constrain the police. So every decision that we have around policing isn't coming from police boards. It's coming, when a judge will say, oh no, you can't use force this way, or I want to constrain strip searches, or we need to control what SWAT teams are doing. We call them ERTs. That is never coming from police boards, and they should be. They should be making policy to restrain the police, and they don't. And that includes their relation to budgeting. So unless you shift those organs, like who is going to defund the police if you don't have a police board in control of the actual people? Do you honestly think that cop lover city councilor A and wife of cop city councilor B or whatever is going to be like defunding the police? Obviously not. So yeah, I mean, that's one reason, the whole reason I kind of got involved in the defunding report in Halifax was because I went to the police board, because I was trying to model for people that even when we're not in crisis, we need to be engaging with these things. Like we need to be going to the board, we need to be going to council, like we have to be actively involved. So yeah, I mean, defunding like many things that then you just get white people as usual that have to make everything a problem, so they don't like the word defunding, but they wouldn't like it if we called it reallocating budgets, and they wouldn't like it if we called it reimagining public safety. Like whatever we call it, they're going to pretend to have a problem with and then claim it's a culture war word and a woke word, because they don't want the concept. And I think the point is that defunding as a concept is not new. The Panthers had defunding in their 10-point plan, right? Like remove money from the military. What did we do when as people will brag about Brian Mulroney helped stop apartheid, but how was that stopped? A boycott. Isn't that just defunding? Defund South Africa? They're going to spend that money on tanks and kill black people, so don't give them the money. That's defunding. What was slavery sugar boycotts but defunding? Like, this is not new. This is a basic tactic. Like, I'm going to withhold my finances from this destructive social thing until they go away. Because if we stop giving them money, then they don't have the same scope. So yeah, they can't buy weapons if we don't give them money to do that. But in order to get there, you have to shift the social idea of policing. Because again, I just read some letter by some, sellout today talking about how black people don't want defunding. We just want an equal, fair police force, like it's only the loudest voices in the black community say that. And this is a guy in Ottawa too, this is very common, again, that people really believe that the only way to stop crime is to have this police force, then less weapons. But we have other models. There's the, Bear Clan, which is actually in some places being appropriated by cop lovers as well, but those are Indigenous community patrols. But, we're going around and picking up needles and doing safe injection sites and talking to people who are unhoused, and also doing what the police don't do, like looking for Indigenous women. So there's all kinds of different models that you can come up with. I think the big misconception is that people like to pretend that if you, strip money or power from one form of policing, then that means we'll all just be running around murdering each other, which, as Margaret said, is the big myth, which, by the way, people love to tell us in Canada too. They defunded the police in Seattle and Minneapolis and crime is up. Actual white people that actually went out and shook the hands of convoy protesters, whatever, don't have to take responsibility for that. Oh, the swastika has nothing to do with me, but I have to be responsible if a black person kills somebody in Chicago, right? Actual things that white people actually did themselves, they get to disown. And every black person on earth has to be responsible for every crime or whatever committed by any black person, not even in your same country. And then it's it kind of reminds me of when there's a terrorist attack that's done by some radical Muslim, often a Wahhabi Islamic sect, and then everybody is always saying the Muslim community doesn't denounce terrorism enough. Well, the Muslim community doesn't denounce terrorism enough, and I'm pretty sure if you were to talk to anyone from the Muslim community, they would say, okay, listen, they don't represent what they do in the name of Islam. They don't represent me. Can you now leave me alone and go away?
Well, not only that, but white people don't denounce what other white people do. Yeah. So I don't know why you have the nerve to come to somebody else's community and say, why don't you denounce it? Well, why don't you denounce what your system does? So anyway, that's just a little aside. It's something I find very...
why are you talking about police? And it's all something you're actually doing. They'll be like, maybe you should talk about education. I'm like, I do.
Yes.
Or the classic thing that some scumbag like Giuliani does is you guys should be denouncing, what's that stupid thing that was in the 90s, black on black crime? Well, I don't know, maybe if you didn't huddle us all into the shittiest neighborhoods and then flood our neighborhoods with crack, who knows? Maybe there wouldn't be so much black on black crime, but
Well, that's a trope. That's another out.
By proximity. So white on white crime is a thing because most people commit crimes with the people they live around. Like I'm going to break into a house and it's probably going to be the next door house, right? So like obviously people are committing crimes with the people that they're interacting with and they have access to. So yes, like the vast majority, similar percentages of crime in white communities are committed by white people, but nobody talks on other white people and no one talks about white on white crime. But yeah, the general point is that, you know, you can't abolish or defund or whatever you want to do if you don't change the basic social ideology behind policing, which is capitalism, which is like, if you're calling the cops because somebody's asking for money outside of Tim Hortons, you also have to think about why houselessness exists, why we treat unhoused people as a threat, where that narrative comes from that prompts us to call the police, right? So yes, it's the police, but it's also everything around it. So that's the obvious issue, that we have to deal with those things. And also, of course, like we have to know how to deal with conflict and harm and stuff ourselves. Like, and I always say this, like we can't get rapists out of our friends circles and then we're like, oh, we're gonna like abolish the prisons. I'm like, well, then we have to, you know, actually have some kind of structure and practice for actually dealing with harm, which actually happens. And we need to start practicing that stuff, right? Which we can do, but our grandmothers did it. You know, they didn't really have police forces roaming around and they protected their communities and their households and families in various strategies. So, you know, because police didn't help the Black community, right? They just didn't come there. Like, so, you know, people had models, and we can think about all of that, right?
And my final question is first to Margaret and then to Ms. Jones. So Margaret, I'd like to revisit this topic with you since we're talking about the police. And I also just want to say, you know, a very quick thing. I really wish that all the racial social justice groups and the anti-police groups would again talk about why we need to end the drug war. I mean, it's incredible that like Michelle Alexander writes a book called The New Jim Crow, and she explicitly talks about the drug war, and I don't hear any of the people power movements talking about ending that stupid racist Dickensian drug war. But Margaret, I want to ask you this, which I actually did several episodes ago, which was, what if we paid the police more? And if we did that, wouldn't we see the police not be prone to corruption, that and stricter gun laws, and them not being so overly paranoid that they shoot every unarmed person? And so Margaret responds to that, and then Ms. Jones, same question to the RCMP, and hey, this is all about inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting, so go ahead.
Well, let me just say this. Cops make very good money. They are very well paid for what they do. They really are. They have a living wage job. They get overtime. They get all, they get to retire at a young age. They get to retire with full benefits after 20 years. There are people in their 40s and they get to retire. They're doing quite well. They really are. And this idea that speaking of the useless Black political class, there's a Black woman running for governor in Georgia, Stacey Abrams, and she actually tweeted, "We need to make sure that cops make more money." And everybody, it was hilarious. It was the worst ratio on Twitter
that's what
we've
she
ever
was
seen.
saying.
People were like, in what universe do cops not make enough money? But they kill people because that's the way the system's set up. They're there to police Black people. And so the deaths are inevitable. And unless that changes, changing how much somebody makes or training, maybe, I don't know, who knows, maybe if someone's trained better, maybe there's a murder that didn't take place. Like, I don't know how you'd prove that, but we have to talk about the nature of white supremacy and how the police function, about policing itself. That is the way out.
So you don't think, so Ms. Jones, before you respond, so you don't think that the reason why we have so much like police corruption and stuff like and stuff like that is because that they're not paid?
They are a law unto themselves. They are a gang. Nobody touches them. Nobody prosecutes them. It's the perfect crime to be a cop. They can kill people and get away with it. They can do all kinds of things. They can lie on the stand in a court of law. When the rest of us can go to jail for perjury. That's why they do things that are wrong, quite simply.
So, Ms. Jones, your response to that question.
Maybe cops are, worse paid in the US or something. I don't know. In Canada, like the vast majority of the Sunshine List, which is, public employees making over $100,000 a year, is cops. Like they're more than half of the list because the like not just good money, like they make top money. They make more than I make, that's for sure. And one of the ironies is, of course, this belief that, you know, police are working class, right? Which is promoted all over our media and these shows. Remember that awful show Blue Bloods about that, like, New York cop family? But like, you know, it's always a salt of the earth Irish person that, you know, just, you know, it's like what cops are. Like, they have 6 months of training in like cop college and they make $100,000 a year and more. And when they're making all that traffic overtime just to stand uselessly and gormlessly around, they're getting like overtime for that. Part of the problem with police budgets is that they get these massive overtimes to stand at a protest when no one needs them there. Like, just to wave at you to drive to where the arrow is that already tells you where to park. Like, I don't need a cop for that. Like, also a volunteer could do that, you know? So this is part of the problem. So no, I mean, that's absurd. Like, cops make a huge amount of money. So the issue with policing, and I will say that obviously it's, you know, the police is sort of the front line of it, but this is what I said, you have to think of the ideology behind policing. If aliens came down and zapped up the police forces today, it's not like we wouldn't just get private security forces doing the exact same thing, right? Because it's not that it's the cops, it's that the police are a natural outgrowth of a capitalist society based on haves and have-not, with some people, white property owning, particularly right-wing, middle class, whatever people belong to the public, and everybody else is envisioned of outside that public. That's the whole image of the thin blue line, right? There's a thin blue line between chaos and order, and implicitly who's in that behind the line? Black people, Indigenous people, drug users, unhoused people, queer people, like people with mental illness, people with disabilities. You know, that's always who's not the real public. And policing is the engine through which you suppress, remove, erase Indigenous people are policed because Indigenous people are the biggest threat to the money. Indigenous sovereignty in Canada is the only stop on resource extraction, right? Because you have to get consent to go through Indigenous territories, and Indigenous people are quite effective at stopping all of those developments. That's why they send the RCMP to jack them up, pull them off the land, beat up grandmothers, arrest them, stick them in prison, because they're in the way of the oil and the natural gas and the billions of dollars. So that's what policing is. That's why courts pass injunctions on behalf of corporations to keep that aren't even Canadian, so that Indigenous people can't go on their own territories to protect their own river, right? So like, this is what we need to understand about the police, that it's an idea, and it's an idea that is fundamentally embedded in capitalism, which will always have to police the forest or the stockade or the fort or, you know, the border. And policing is also CBSA, right? It's also border policing. It's also child welfare agents. It's also doctors and nurses that, you know, call the cops on unhoused people in their emergency room. It's also, you know, school security officers. It's a whole edifice. And until you get at why that is and why people feel like they need the police and who you call the cops on, it doesn't matter who you eliminate, because you're just going to put something else back to do the exact same thing.
And the idea that you know that we just pay the police more because they're working class people who are also struggling like all of us. So do you think that is that just BS that, you know, that's something like that some of us just make up in our heads? And
that's
is
like,
it also
teachers are killing students, I guess we should pay them more? Like, what other job would that be the solution? Like, if I just like went to work and murdered a bunch of people, would people be like, well, you know, professor salaries these days? Maybe arts profs should be making more, you know? Like, I would say police are the only people that can, you know, like consistently screw up on the job, and then the solution is give them more funding. Like, if your worker at Burger King was fucking up, no one would be like, maybe we should raise the salary. Be like, that's why we shouldn't raise minimum wage. They can't even get me my burger in time. Cops murder people, and you're like, oh, they just need more funding. They just need more training. Like, there is nothing the police, whatever police do, the solution is give them more money. Oh, they're racially profiling. We need more money to hire minority cops. Oh, the police couldn't stop a white guy like dressing up like a cop and driving around the province shooting people. Like, I guess they need more weaponry. Like, we need more critical response teams. Oh, the police are constantly racially like profiling people. Oh, I guess we need to send them to school and they need to be paid to do that. Like, the rest of us have to go into massive debt to like get our jobs, but the cops should be paid for, right? So no, it's the biggest, like one of the biggest, along with corporations, it's one of the biggest like welfare programs, you know, is like the police. So I don't even understand the universe in which people think the cops don't make money. The cops make tons of money.
Interesting. And then okay, I promise this will be the final question. Margaret, do you Margaret, Ms. Jones, do you think the reason why somebody like me still thinks that the police are a necessary evil, is that because I simply have been watching way too much good television where the cops are the good guys and
it's propaganda. That's the term we use is propaganda.
Yeah.
I don't believe any Black person should watch a cop show on television. Nothing they tell you is true. The things they do are horrible. And they convince you of that. So you'll go along with it. It's like, well, the only way to stay safe is to have police. They show up after a crime has been committed. I don't understand why having more police is opposed to accomplish anything. There's so many things that would cut crime. First of all, we need a more generous society here in the U.S. Everybody needs to be housed. Everybody needs to have living wage work. There's so many things that could be done to make our society safer. And this notion that we have to have this well-funded gang of people in order for all of us to feel safe is just a lie. And could I be a victim of a crime? I could, but is that if they hire more cops, if there are more cops in my neighborhood, am I less likely to be a victim of a crime? I don't think so. And they'll show up after something's happened, after I call them. So there's a lot of propaganda, and we have to be very careful. It's something that seeps into our consciousness after being exposed to it for many years.
Yeah,
and remember, like, Amazon workers aren't supposed to have a union, but cop unions are the most powerful unions. Like, cop unions get to have unions, right? While everybody else, workers don't get unions. If workers try to organize for unions, cops come in and beat the shit out of them and arrest you and say it's private property. But, police unions are some of the biggest regressive forces. Like, they're the ones that when the police chief will finally admit something like, okay, systemic racism exists, then inevitably the so-called frontline, like brotherhood of cop union people release a statement about how they can't do their job anymore because everyone's so woke. And, so yeah, like if cops want to be like this idea that, again, cops are working class, like they get to be in unions, like alongside of us. And then the police unions are the most violent, racist, regressive people out there. So, again, I just fight the idea that cops are the working class. Cops are the most hostile force to the working class, and a huge point of policing is to repress workers and break strikes and make sure that there's no worker solidarity. So we should never be buying into that.
Interesting, and then I promise this will be the final one. Sorry, I promise this will be the final one.
That was my. Youri.
This is the last one. Okay.
Okay. Final question. Ms. Jones and Margaret, you can also comment on this. Your response then to England, that's the model of regressive policing and so forth, the Mets, the Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard. But but funny enough, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party and was campaigning to be Prime Minister, hoping to unseat Theresa May, there was a terrorist attack, and a lot of people were then talking about, oh, the reason why this terrorist attack happened and the reason why there's so much crime is because we've been cutting the police budget. The police have also been victims of austerity, so we need more money for the police. What would be your response to them, given that Black people die in custody in the police and there's lots of police brutality, the very things that Indigenous, Black, and other people face in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, the same thing happens in Britain.
People don't understand what police do. A very small percentage of policing is like murders. It's tiny. What police mostly do is enforce bylaws, drive around, and like that's the vast majority of it, like noise complaints, basic city bylaws, traffic policing, which can be done by cameras, harassing homeless people. So people also, again, because you watch crime shows where every week there's a million murders and serial killers, and then people think that cops spend all their days like chasing down murderers. They don't. There's like less than a dozen murders a year in my city. Like that's not what they do. So this is based again on this like propaganda misconception that the cops are performing all these vital acts, and mostly they're not. They're sitting in their car. Like the reason why cops show up in force in the first place is because they're bored. I had a friend who was like, there was a car speeding, and then they stopped her, like a Black woman, like it was like 8 cars or something, 6 cars, because they're all bored. Like when you sit in the police complaint, they're just all chilling in the cut, and then someone goes, oh, there's a speeding car, and everyone's like, okay, like let me join this chase because I don't have anything to do because I'm on this long shift and I'm sitting around drinking coffee and eating a donut, like in a parking lot. So they don't have enough work to do. Like, so again, like let's see the data, because people aren't actually relying on evidence. They're relying on mythology and so-called common sense, like based from like watching, either absorbing cop propaganda, watching cop shows, and they have a misconception of what policing is, what it does. And then, of course, when people are in plain sight, every single time you have a mass shooter or something, there's massive red flags that nobody's picking up on, right? They're like, oh, you know, the dude was online, like making violent comments to like Black people and women for like 2 years before he shot up the mosque. You know, if that was like a Muslim person, obviously that would have been like, CSIS would have been there like day one, but because it's a white guy, they're like, oh, we just couldn't do anything. So, you know, again, we had a mass shooting in my province, the so-called worst one in Canadian history, which obviously leaves out all the mass shootings of Indigenous people. But like he drove around in a cop car. Why do you think he did that? He repurposed a cop car, painted it, wore a fake police uniform, and went around and murdered people. Like if there's anything more telling than that he camouflaged himself as a cop and moved around the province to murder people, I don't know what it is. So I think that people in the UK just, it's the same thing as, oh, they defunded the police and now crime is up. Like, show me the proof. Show me where they did it. Show me the evidence. Show me the crime mapping. Show me that, because I guarantee you it's not there.
And most of the crimes in the UK, I don't know how we would stop something like the knife crime epidemic, but a lot of that again goes back to what both of you have been talking about, which is poverty, austerity, and whatnots. Right?
Yeah, I mean, as Margaret said, you have to deal with the social causes of crime, like poverty, mental illness, trauma, addiction, like lack of resources, lack of jobs, lack of housing, lack of living wage. Like women are the fastest growing incarcerated population because under austerity, women can't feed their kids. So people engage in petty crimes and then get, you know, so it's crimes of poverty and then people get arrested. We build more prisons, we fill them, right? Like this is basic facts. So yeah, if you want to solve crime, you have to invest in the social system. So stop giving money to the cops and give money to housing, give money to you know, actual like community-based education that's like productive, give money to therapy and a health system, give money to anything, safe injection sites, like a safe supply of drugs, whatever it is. Like
mental health being merged with single payer systems.
I want to say too, in the United States, there was a huge growth in the prison population without a huge growth in crime. So a lot of that was just to put Black people in jail. It was a reaction against the liberation movement. So, but that's my final word.
Yeah, and that goes back to the drug war. But anywho, I don't want to keep you too. Well, anywho, you two have been more than generous enough with your time. So we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our special Canada Day and our special pre-truth-telling July 4th. Special with the brilliant Margaret Kimberley, senior columnist, executive editor of Black Agenda Report, and member of Black Alliance for Peace. People should check out both of those places, donate generously to both those places, and subscribe to Black Agenda Report, news, commentary, and analysis from a Black left perspective. And we were also joined by the brilliant L. Jones, poet, educator. Next time I'll remember the name of your university. Member, contributing member of the Breach, and just a brilliant social justice, racial justice activist and anti-imperialist. Both of you, thank you so much for joining me today. And seeing as it's Canada Day and soon the 4th of July, Native Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and power to the people, death to settler colonialism and white supremacy and racial capitalism.
There you go.
There you go. Peace.
Bye.
Until then, and have a very great weekend.
Okay. Good night. Thank you both.